to the June 16th morning Board of County Commissioners meeting. I'm going to read a little information for the public who's viewing. Welcome to our virtual format. The public who is watching this meeting, when you registered to watch this meeting, you were registered in our system as attendees. Attendees are webinar participants who are simply viewers of the meeting and audience member. Your microphone and your webcam are automatically muted as attendees. However, there will be a time in the meeting where we'll open it up for public comment. And when that time comes, if you wish to make public comment, I'll ask you to raise your virtual hand to be recognized. And you should see a hand icon on the device you are using to watch this meeting. Simply press the hand icon once to raise your hand. When public comment begins, our meeting organizer will call names. When your name is called, you'll be unmuted and given 3 minutes for public comment. When your 3 minutes is up, you'll go back into muted status and the next name will be called. You can continue to watch the webinar as long as you like. We will try to give everyone who wishes to present an opportunity to speak, but please note, in the event there are more people wishing to speak than the time allots, we may need to limit the speakers, reduce the time for each speakers, or select speakers randomly. We have not had the need to do that so far. And this is a technological warning. We've seen on another platform that platform has gone down with some major technological issues. And we, of course, have had our own issues on this platform last week with random muting. So just be aware that that could happen if the platform fails and we're unable to continue. Unfortunately, there's no other platform for us to resume. So hopefully that won't happen. But if it does, just be aware we'll probably have to pick another day for a meeting because we've got several items to get through before our next 2-week break. So we have 2 time certains today. We have our 9 a.m. Regarding our supplemental budget, and at 1:30 several public works items. And we are going to try out an evening public comment session this evening. We haven't had one since we've gone to the virtual format, but we're going to give it a go, and it's at 5:30. So for people who aren't able to make our morning or after, or well, a morning one for public comment, you can speak this evening. We'll see how many people can attend. Commissioner Sorensen, I saw your hand up.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I'm sorry about the technological problems. I'm just wondering if we do have a kind of a meltdown or where we can't communicate with each other on this video method. I'm wondering if we can get a news release out to the public, or the people that have signed up, or at least the commissioners, to get an email of what the backup plan is. If we're going to, resume the meeting this evening, or resume the meeting tomorrow, or what? Because it seems like it's going to be kind of a logistical problem of getting everybody back together if we do suffer a break. Do you have any insight on that for us?
Commissioner Sorensen, this is Diana. If we should suffer a breakdown, I will communicate with Commissioner Buck, and we will let the commissioners know when our next meeting would be or how we will resume, and we will email the commissioners the information.
Yeah, my question was more, I know you would do that, and thank you. My question was more about the media and the public and the people that have signed up for public comment, and just the public in general, to know that this has happened, and that's why the meeting ended abruptly if it does.
I will coordinate with Devin or one of the PIOs if that happens.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, well, we will start with our first time certain, which is item 1A, our public hearing, order, and resolution 20-06-16-01. in the matter of adopting the fiscal year 1920 supplemental budget number 4, making, reducing, and transferring appropriations. And with us, I believe we have Christine Moody, our budget and financial planning manager.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Chair Buck, Commissioners. So as mentioned, this is the 4th and final supplemental budget of the current fiscal year. I'll just highlight a few things for you because we do have a public hearing today because we have 2 of our funds that are changing their appropriation estimates by more than 10%, and so that requires a public hearing. But I wanted to point out for you that while this supplemental increases our resources by over $3 million, that is primarily because we're doing a transfer of $5 million from the general fund to the capital fund. So if you look at revenue, instead of just the resources number, revenue is going down. That is being caused primarily because we're making the adjustments that you heard about during budget committee for next year, also happening this year in the road fund with our gas tax coming in lower, parks and Lane Event Center. So those 3 are having reductions in revenue, and that's causing that revenue to decrease, even though you see resources as a whole going up. There are some FTE being added, primarily within Health and Human Services. Those are detailed for you by fund. And then there are some other transfers occurring and some departmental expenditures increasing just in various areas. So if you have any questions, we can answer those, or we can do the public hearing first, whatever you prefer.
Let's do our public hearing first, and then we can have discussion afterwards. So this is a public hearing on supplemental budget number 4 to the current fiscal year as allowed under ORS 294.471 and ORS 294.473. This public hearing is required under ORS 294.473 due to one or more funds amending estimate expenditures by more than 10% from current budgeted amounts. This notice of this hearing and summary of changes was published in detail in the supplemental budget order and resolution, including in this agenda item. Participants may testify for and against any item contained in the supplemental budget. And with that, I will open the public hearing. And I'll transfer this to our moderator.
Thank you, Chair Buck. At this time, I do show 3 people, 3 attendees for this meeting. If you are attending this meeting for this public hearing and would like to give testimony, please raise your hand now. This is not the public comment period. This is just for the supplemental budget. Chair Buck, I do not see any hands being raised. I do not believe we have any public comment for this item.
Hey, Debbie, will you tell the sheriff that I'm not sure the meeting's progressing along here, but we might be able
Is this somebody, we hear somebody speaking, is this somebody who wants to do public testimony? Didn't sound like it. Okay, well, with that, it doesn't look like there's any public testimony on this. We'll close the public hearing. Any final comments from staff before discussion?
No further comments. Thank you.
Okay. Any comments or questions from board members? I don't see any. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the supplemental order and resolution as submitted.
I move approval.
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Sorensen, second by Commissioner Burney. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay. Order and resolution passes unanimously. We'll move on to item 1B, which is order and resolution 20-06-16-02 in the matter of adopting the 2020 and 2021 Lane County budget, making appropriations and imposing and categorizing taxes. Ms. Moody?
Yes, thank you, Chair Buck, Commissioners. So this item coming to you to adopt the budget for 2021, which begins July 1st. We had a work session last Tuesday, as you will remember, where we brought to you information on some changes, and then there were additional changes requested by the board related to the road fund reserves. And so those adjustments have been made. And so you do have an attachment to the agenda item that shows you all the changes by fund, by organizational unit, and then the total changes occurring between the time. You have two different attachments, one that will show the changes that the budget committee made, so what became our approved budget, and then the changes that you're seeing to the approved budget in order to come up with our adopted budget number. So I really would just open it up for questions if there are any. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Maybe one thing I will point out in the order for you is that there is a new something we haven't put in to pull out before so specifically is to make sure that the percentage of our local option levy is spelled out as far as the percentage that goes to the sheriff's office and the percentages that go to youth services, just so that that's documented in a board order. But with that, I'm open for any questions.
Any questions or comments? Oh, not seeing any. I would entertain a motion to approve order and resolution 20-06-16-02 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Burney, second by Commissioner Sorensen. That discussion, Commissioner Farr.
Just a question. Does this budget include any additional rural patrol for the Sheriff's Department?
It does not.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out a couple things as we get ready to vote to approve the budget for the next fiscal year for the public and to have them understand a few things. First of all, there were a couple proposals that would have moved some money into the sheriff's office, and those were voted down in the budget committee process. There was also a move to try and get us back into the Association of Oregon and California Railroad Lands Counties, and that was voted down. And as we're looking at a budget that's reducing revenue by over $8 million, participating in an organization that lobbies on a specific set of lands that only exist in 18 counties in the state of Oregon seemed to be wise, as it used to bring in somewhere between $20 to $40 million a year, $20 into our general fund. But even with those, I will vote to support this budget because there's a lot in this budget that people may not realize. And we had some public comments about moving money out of the sheriff's office or moving money out of public safety. But I don't think people understand that Lane County is on the cutting edge of restorative justice. And much of our public safety budget actually goes to the services people want us to divert money to. Through our Public Safety Coordinating Council here locally, and with the leadership of the Sheriff's Office, the DA, our local court system, our parole and probation, and many of our nonprofits, we're doing some amazing work with this budget. Whether it's money that comes from the federal government in the form of grants for a treatment court that's part of the sheriff's dollar amount, because the sheriff is the administrator for those grants, but that treatment court is doing amazing work in changing people's lives and diverting people out of the criminal justice system through treatment and getting them back to, healthy whole lives. To our programs for taking people that are being released from prison and reintegrating them in a way where we've dropped recidivism down to rates that are just pretty amazing. Through our RLAM program, which is also funded through the sheriff's office and shows up in their budget. But part of that money goes to nonprofits like Sponsors and Emergence for the housing, post-prison housing, or the drug treatment group along with that. So it's just, I could go on and on and on about how much of our public safety budget is actually doing that restorative justice work. And I would encourage folks that are coming before us and asking us to defund public safety to first understand that we defunded patrol when we lost our timber funds, which was one of the reasons why I was fighting to become a member of the Association of O&C Counties again. But other than that, a lot of our public safety system is doing the good work people want us to do. And I just wanted to have a moment to talk about that a little bit because we got some public testimony last week I really didn't get a chance to respond to. But be aware that a lot of public safety dollars end up at Kids First, Women's Space, Sponsors, Emergence, Willamette Family, all great organizations doing great social work in our community and changing people's lives.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this being my 24th and final budget adoption. I just wanted to say that for the public, that they should know that hundreds of people have been involved in formulating this budget, and that really every day is a budget day in Lane County government. Christine Moody's done an excellent job of coordinating the budget again this year, as she has for many years. And there's many people, especially our citizen members, who sit through the briefings and get informed on the budget and then do their best to participate in the budget meetings leading up to the approval of the budget. And then the board takes it from there with this process ending today. But really every day is another element of the whole budget process, and it's really a Herculean effort to get it put together. And we'll see another budget amendment in a few months. And first and foremost, I just want to say that that this is a great process, that the people have an opportunity to improve it, make it longer, make it shorter, and it's really up to the commissioners and the budget committee on how they want to structure it. I think with the new commissioner coming on board in January, you might consider having a longer period of time for the budget committee to consider the budget and have the budget presentation started so that the budget is formally proposed by the county administrator maybe a month earlier to give more time for the budget committee to consider it. I know there are logistical problems with that, but I think if we start now on that idea, more likely to have more input from the public budget committee members. Another thing I'd like to mention is that this is the last budget of what I would call the last 50 years. And what I mean by that is that because of the financial and social and medical impact of the COVID-19 crisis, it seems like the business as usual is definitely going to be changed. And I wish the best to my current 4 colleagues, and I wish the best to the Lane County Board of Commissioners just in general in dealing with the immensity of these problems that you're going to be dealing with. The fact that Oregon budget law allows for a fairly fluid, I would say, interpretation of what kind of funds are coming in means that we haven't had to really face the true financial consequences of this crisis. And next year, a year from now, you will be facing that. You will be facing that, in my view. So I just want to say thank you to the public budget committee members, all the staff, and the commissioners, all the commissioners in working on this budget. And thank you very much.
Commissioner Burney.
Thank you. First to Commissioner Sorensen, if every day is a budget day, when you leave here, sir, you will have had 8,760 budget days, and I think that's enough for any one commissioner. I would also like to thank Commissioner Bozovich for, just drilling a little deeper into everything that's in this budget. We are right now, and this budget, which was developed as not quite as if, but based on what we know. And we know that what we don't know is looming large and will be impacting what we know moving forward. So with the triple the triple threat of global pandemic, global economic recession at a minimum, and global civil unrest that's occurring right now. So, I'm taking deep breaths as we move forward. And I finally wanted to also state that indeed, I'm saying this to the public, indeed, Commissioner Bozovich has been a champion for including AOCC in the budget. And, as someone that did not vote in that direction this year, I want to acknowledge that. And I think he's the most articulate champion of that that I've met. I would like to say that I'm disappointed because I had laid out a couple of items that would be necessary for me to reconsider my vote on this. And we have heard nothing from AOCC in that regard, including not a phone call, not any discussion of open meeting laws, not the work session I had indicated I would like to be better informed on that. So, with that string dangling, I just want to acknowledge that there has been more discussion and more debate on that than the public is aware. And that was suggested by one of the testimonies last week, public input last week. But I think all in all, based on what we know, I'm enthused to vote to approve this budget. And my hat's off to the administration, Steve, Christine, for what is in here as we move into uncharted waters.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. I will be exceedingly brief. I don't have a doom and gloom message. I apologize for that. I'd like to follow in everybody's footsteps in gloom and doom. But I've got better news. We are in chaotic times right now. And in chaotic times, you have an opportunity to take loose threads and build a new fabric. That is what we're doing right now. And we've already taken steps in that direction. Yesterday, I got news from Mr. Mcalister that the full reimbursement has taken place for the River Avenue facility, $5.3 million total, I believe. That facility is ours. It's going to be ours for a long time to come. When you really have to think hard about the way you do things, that is when you have an opportunity to do things better. And I'm really convinced that we're not at the brink of a disastrous 4 years. We're at the brink of a really successful 4 years. I'm confident that we will be able to pull through it with fewer resources than we've had in the past and facing economic instability, perhaps. But we have the talent and the staff to do it, and we've already demonstrated that. We have good things ahead of us, board. We have good things ahead of us.
Any other discussion? The benefit of being the chair is speaking last. So you all said so many things that I would have also said. The only feedback I think I would give about the whole budgeting process we've had so far this year is that we did hear from our citizen members that they would like a little bit more robust budgeting process. We need bylaws for the committee, it sounds like, from our process. So, some intermediate meetings for the budget committee wouldn't necessarily be a bad idea. Commissioner Bray?
I just wanted to tag on, Chair, that as I recall, and thank you for saying that, as I recall, two of the budget committee members that actually have pretty solid backgrounds in measurement offered at no cost to our organization to contribute to developing some sort of a framework we could look at when we begin this next year.
Okay, well, with that, we'll go to the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, we'll go to item 2. Any adjustments to the agenda? I don't see any. Any emergency business? Okay, don't see any. We'll move to public comments, and I will transfer this over to our moderator.
Thank you, Chair Buck. At this time, if you have registered for the meeting and you would like to participate in public comment, please raise your virtual hand and I will call upon you. I see 2 hands up. The first person will be Charles C. Kaler. I apologize if I did pronounce your name incorrectly. I will unmute your mic and I will start the timer. When the timer starts, you may begin your public comment. 1 moment. You may begin your public comment.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. My name's Charles Kaler, and I'm the current president of the League of Women Voters of Lane County. I've asked for this time today to be certain that you've seen the email from the League with our thoughts about redistricting county commission seats in 2021. The email came from our voter service chair, Paula Grisafi. I know that you have at least tentatively decided not to put a charter amendment on the November ballot to create an independent redistricting committee. The email you should have all received by now makes some suggestions for an ordinance that would put the redistricting process at more of an arm's length from the commission itself. We hope that this ordinance could be the foundation for a future charter amendment. We suggest several key points for you to consider: a clear timeline that allows for public input into such an ordinance, how such a semi-independent committee might be appointed and structured, criteria for membership on the committee, require compliance with open meetings and public records laws, assure professional staff to the committee, and require you, the board, to accept one of the recommended maps produced by such a committee. We're sorry current emergencies prevent this from getting to the ballot this November. However, we hope you will schedule another work session on the county's redistricting process soon. This will help to assure the public that the process is thoughtful and less likely to affect whatever the politics of late 2021 will be, and hopefully give us all time to engage people. Again, we're very willing to help. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker will be Chris Mcalister. Mr. Mcalister, I will unmute you and I will reset the timer and your public comment will begin. 1 moment. You may begin your public comment.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the commission. My name is Chris Mcalister and I live in Springfield. I am coming before you with a couple items. One is I would like to ask that as the Roth building is currently in your possession, that you consider utilizing that with its 60+ rooms as a means for medically fragile or a cohort of people waiting to get into inpatient treatment. I have found in my attempts to try and help some of the medically fragile and people seeking interventions for their addiction issues, since we shut down and demobilized our county shelters recently on June 5th, that I'm having very hard trouble placing people who are on successful tracks to recovery or to medical intervention. I have successfully, through my own pay, paid for 4 people to be sheltered and cared for those last 10 days so that we can try and find bridges, as they do not currently exist in our county. I've been told that some of my people need to relapse in order to get help with detoxing and sobering. And that is not acceptable as we try and move forward as a community. I would also like to, as we look at building out things along MLK Centennial Boulevard, we need to consider what kind of message we're sending when we can't let our unhoused people camp or rest in certain sites because of possible drugs or alcohol. Yet every time we have a game day or a big event, we have unregistered populations milling around in greater numbers, utilizing alcohol and illicit drugs while exploring some of our local festivities. I really think that we need to have a shared standard among all of our residents and citizens. And I do not think that the U of O or its supporters should be exempt from the same kind of policies that govern our unhoused. Often our unhoused are policed against for actions that housed people coming to play games do not have to follow. And so we need a common standard, we need common answers, and we need to utilize our common resources. The people need showers, the people need bathroom access, and as everything else opens up for our housed people, the options have not restored for our unhoused. The waiting lists are still there, the housing is still empty, and the parks are still open. I really appreciate the opportunity to work with our county staff. Our Health and Human Services Department is awesome and trying to solve some of the hardest problems with some of the least amount of capacity. I would really encourage us to build with spots to be, and then ask City of Springfield and City of Eugene to help finance it and help staffing. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day. And thank you for the evening option for people to comment. Good night.
Thank you for your public comment, Mr. Mcalister. I do show one other person has signed up for public comment, but I do not see your hand raised. I'm going to unmute you to see if you would like to speak. Mr. Gray, I'm going to unmute you quickly. Mr. Gray, do you wish to give public comment?
Not at this time. I need more.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we were not missing anybody. Thank you. Chair Buck, at this time, we do not have any more people signed up for public comment, so I will turn the meeting back over to you.
Okay, we'll move to Commissioner's remonstrance or comments. Anybody wish to speak? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. A bit of a surprise that we had so few speakers this morning. I hope they show up this evening in full force. I'd hope and anticipate that that's the case. A couple of things. The Shelter and Supportive Housing Committee has been renamed the Shelter Stakeholder Committee. It's a multi-jurisdictional committee that meets monthly. We had our meeting on Monday, yesterday. That committee is comprised of the mayors of Springfield and Eugene. It's also comprised of Jacob Fox and Chris Mcalister, who you just heard speaking, as well as Sean Murphy and me, and Dan Bryant will be on the committee from as of next meeting. I'm anticipating. The committee is working on a work plan of policy items to recommend to the various boards and the various jurisdictions. It's a pretty interesting committee. We had a great meeting yesterday. Sarai Johnson is staffing the meeting, and Sarai is doing a superb job of bringing a lot of loose ends together. Look for a lot of work out of that committee and look for a lot of results as we move forward, adjusting to the fact that we have distancing in our standard shelters, our regular shelters, as we move forward into our winter strategies plan, which we're working on at this point in time. You'll hear a lot of work out of that committee, and I look forward to the presentations that you'll be hearing about that. The second thing I'd like to say, and Mr. Mcalister, I'm going to direct this to you, and I will bring this back up at the end of the meeting, perhaps. Well, almost certainly. You know, last week we passed a resolution. It was 20-09-06. It was a pretty broad resolution, but there were a couple of items that were embedded in the resolution. One of them was action items to be added to the strategic plan in the form of tactics that are embedded in the strategic plan that we can measure, report back on. And Mr. Mcalister, I would like to suggest something at this point in time, which is an action item. We have a lot of people around right now who are concerned about the history of the naming of the county we live in, the history of Lane County. Very few people in the county really actually know the history and what is the history. And I think it would be important that we have some discussion about that. So what I'm the resolution has 2 points in it. The resolution -06 from last week. One is to work with community members and staff to acknowledge and address the root causes of inequities in Lane County, and to communicate with the community, including county employees, about the root causes of racial inequities, as well as the corrective action that's been or will be taken. What I'd like to ask Mr. Mcalister for your consideration, you can respond a little bit right now or maybe later in the meeting. I'd like to call for a report back from the administrator for the possibility of an ad hoc committee to trace and report the history of the naming of Lane County, and also the history of the person for whom, Charles Lane, for whom the county is named. This would be, in my vision, it's your call, Mr. Mcalister, when you come back on it. It would be an ad hoc committee of members of the community to discuss exactly what I've just said, the history of the naming of Lane County and the history of the man it's named for. Mr. Mcalister, thank you.
Chair Buck, if you'd like me just briefly to respond, I'm happy to do that. And Commissioner, if there are head nods from the other commissioners, we certainly can make that an assignment. I have asked our staff to begin looking into this. Topic has come up occasionally in the past few years. I know that Commissioner Sorensen brought it up last week, and and I've asked our staff to begin looking at that history and at what some options may be that would actually be feasible options for the board to consider. So I'm happy to bring back a report with some analysis to commissioners. And what I'm hearing you say is look at the history of the current name and potentially some options moving forward. Is that correct, Commissioner?
That is, and my recommendation, which I'll actually make at the end of the meeting, is to form an ad hoc committee for this purpose only.
Yeah. Yes, so we certainly can do that, and maybe have some more discussion at the end of the meeting about specifically what you'd be looking for that we could bring back for you.
Thank you. And at that point, other commissioners may weigh in. Chair Buck, I have one other item under items, and I received a document this morning. It's called Emergency Rental Assistance Ensuring Housing Stability During the COVID-19 Pandemic. It's from the federal government. It's a congressional action that's on that. The documentation came out this morning. I'd like to invite everybody to take a look at this, because we'll be hearing discussion regarding rental stability. And it's a $100 billion package that's being put before Congress to ensure rental stability. There's a 2-page document. Really excellent read. I'd like to encourage you all to take a look at it. It was circulated first thing this morning. Thank you.
Commissioner Bozovich. Commissioner, you're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I clicked that button. So first, I want to say that I support the idea that was originally brought forward by Commissioner Sorensen to look into the naming of Lane County and establishing a process, maybe even beyond the ad hoc committee, to look at the actual history of it, because I think the history is fairly well documented. Wikipedia will tell you just about everything about Joseph Lane, and the fact that he was honored by having the county named after him. But also that citizen committee maybe even to look at a list of other lanes in America and Oregon that may be possibilities for a redesignation of the county's name after somebody that's might be more deserving. Last week when Pete brought this up at the end of the meeting, I think all of us were kind of not quite, it was a surprise and we weren't ready to jump in, but I've had a week to think about it and really think it's an important idea to look into, as Joseph Lane has not got the greatest history that to have our county named after. I do want to address some of the public comment quickly. I just want to thank Charles C. and the League of Women Voters for their support for the idea of an independent way of redistricting. I only wish that the county and the board had moved a little faster with the suggestions I made well before the COVID crisis hit. But I understand that, it didn't seem very urgent last year. But one of the things we're faced with is our county code has restrictions on charter amendments in odd years. And therefore is going to make it difficult to do anything prior to this process unless we change code, which we can do by ordinance also. Second, I want to just say to Chris, I understand your desire to use the Roth building, but I don't know if you're aware that later on we're going to be allocating funding for the reconstruction of that as our medically assisted treatment facility, and that work's going to be beginning. So I doubt that it's going to be available. And the importance of that expanding our capacity for medically assisted treatment is really important in this community as the most effective way of dealing with the opioid crisis, which drives a lot of homelessness. So hopefully you can see that ultimately that building is going to be put to good use, and we're starting that process. Just like it seemed like, several years ago when we started down the process of starting to do some kind of housing first project, we weren't looking at a possible groundbreaking in less than a few months of that facility, and it's all come together. So that said, I will note that there's a little bit of difference between a OLCC approved event and legal use of alcohol under that event versus illegal use of drugs, which are not legal during football games, or alcohol non-sanctioned by OLCC on county property, as we have to adhere to federal laws concerning drug-free workplaces and other issues. So I hope you can understand that there's quite a difference between a football game and illegal unsanctioned use of drug and alcohol on county property. With that, I just want to again support Commissioner Farr's call and Commissioner Sorensen's call to look into the naming of and possible renaming of Lane County.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. Yes, I don't know which commissioners supported this idea a week ago. I know I proposed it, but I didn't see who was the other commissioner. But I do know that there was not enough support for a work session on this topic. And I think that that it's an important thing. I'm going to renew my request at the end of the, at the appropriate time of the meeting to have that work session so that people can further educate the commissioners on the naming of Lane County and why the current name isn't really a good name. I know that I've taken groups of middle schoolers and high schoolers on tours of the courthouse and seen the portrait of Joseph Lane and his life and some of the significant accomplishments of his life. It was important to some of the kids, but also I pointed out that he had run for vice president unsuccessfully, I'm glad to say, against the team of led by Abraham Lincoln. So that students knew something about, and that caused some inquiries about his his life, and I just think that this topic is very timely in light of what we have learned recently, and some of us very recently, some of us not so recently. I also wanted to say that I sent the resolution we passed around to various county commissioners in Oregon. I got back a really positive response from Commissioner Casey Kula of Yamhill County, and he said, "Thanks, Commissioner. Good job, Lane County." But on the other hand, I got an email from, I'll just read here. "Pete, I am sorry that Lane County had such a problem with equity that they now must change their policies we in Baker County have not had a problem of being fair to everyone. So we will not have such a pressing need to issue some resolution. We in Eastern Oregon already treat everyone the same and have for as long as I can remember. And I have lived in Baker County for 50 years. To us, all lives matter, including pre-born. Sincerely, Bill Harvey, Chairman, Baker County Commission. So I did send that along to Mr. Mokrahysky and Ms. Young. I haven't responded to that one. But, you know, we've obviously touched a bit of a nerve, and I think that it's important that we try to do the best we can. I think that having that work session would give some voice to people who, and maybe educate us further on the naming and possible renaming. Thank you.
Commissioner Burney.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you. I want to add my voice to the chorus, looking forward to scheduling, moving clearly and transparently and democratically towards looking at how we are going to be doing redistricting based upon data that we're going to get, if and how that, because of the year, the timing issue that Commissioner Bozovich mentioned, that can become an ordinance once we go through that process and ensure all voices are heard, and how, while we might miss the deadline for going further, we still can do that. And I look forward to that process. I would like to make a comment about all of this sort of gingerly discussing the potential for renaming the county. First off, I would like to say that as add my head as a nod here, but as we move forward with this, I am concerned that this always becomes something that county staff, as if we don't all know as if we can't all click on Wikipedia and get a very quick assessment with detail of the history of the naming of Lane County. We only need 3 months to do that. But what I do think we ought to look at is how we teach democracy and teach something like this to students and young people in Lane County. And so if we are going to move forward, I suggest we work through existing infrastructure. We have every high school that would like to in the county, let students do the studying we are asking county staff to do, have students from each school bring to the Board of Commissioners their proposals, their rationale why, the research, the analysis that they did, the number of people they met with, and give us something in a work session to really grapple with and roll up our sleeves and have some results from. So forgive my long-winded discussion of methodology, but I think it's time. I also must say that for someone who has dealt with, fair housing, equal employment opportunities, and a variety of other training, education, I'm sorry that it's taken this long for some that have been here a long time to decide that this is something we need to look at, but let's do it. The time is right. And let's include young people, for goodness sakes, in the process so that they can learn the process of making change while they're still young, because we are going to need them to be quite competent at that as we move forward. Thank you.
Any other comments? Remonstrance? Okay, I will just add my 2 cents here. I did receive the League of Women email, as I think we all did, and had a chance to read it. I do believe that staff needs a little guidance from us as a board as to how to do public input on this particular item. So hopefully we can set an agenda item for that in the future. I know people are really interested in this particular subject, and they would want to know when it's on our agenda so that they can be informed and watch. So we can talk about that more when we're talking about agenda items. Clearly, we have a lot of support here on the board regarding renaming, including myself, and having that conversation, I think, will be good for the community. I love your thoughts, Commissioner Bernie, about including civics in our children's classes around the community. I really like that. And I'm sure there's lots of other ways that we can include the community in this discussion. It would be pretty significant to change the name, and I want to hear the community's thoughts about that too. So if there's no other remonstrance, we will move to the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Whoops, Commissioner Farr, were you move to approve?
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Bernie, second by Commissioner Bozovich. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. All right, we are on to item 7A, which is our COVID response and recovery. We have Mr. Mokrahysky and Ms. Gaffney, Director of Health and Human Services. And I do believe we have the sheriff who wants to say a few words on this item as well.
Yes, good morning, Chair Buck and commissioners. I think our order of the morning is I'm going to keep my remarks very brief, give you a little bit of an update. The county administrator has some updates from our recovery branch, and then we'll keep the bulk of the time for the sheriff to brief you on situation at the jail related to COVID. I think embedded in that, first, I want to acknowledge that the county has successfully transitioned from a department-wide emergency operations center to now having a department operations center inside Health and Human Services that's focused on the specific health strategies around containing the spread of COVID, and then a separate incident management team that is leading our recovery efforts. So we will mirror that in our briefing to you today and as we move forward. As you all know from our regular correspondence, we have seen an uptick of cases in Lane County. As of this morning, we currently have 89 people who have tested positive and 1 presumptive case, so a total of 90 cases. Of those, 7 people we would consider active cases, and all of those people are recovering at home. We don't have anyone in the hospital. And as I think about the status in other parts of the state, we continue to be very lucky, and we work really hard to keep our spread of disease contained. There have been major outbreaks to the north of us in Lincoln County, and we are monitoring that very closely. And then a huge uptick from Union County in Eastern Oregon this last week. So as you've probably heard, that has led the governor to push pause on any additional relaxation of standards across the state. Everyone who was positioned to move to the next phase, whether that was Multnomah moving to 1 or other counties moving to 2, has been put on pause for at least a week. The other 2 quick things I would say, we continue to focus our efforts in public health on testing and tracing. Those are really the core efforts of our work. And on the tracing side, as you know from our past discussions, the idea is to be able to link cases as much as possible. What we want to avoid seeing are sporadic, unlinked cases that are just appearing across the county. And our team continues to do that work quite successfully. Over the course of the pandemic, of those 90 cases that we've had, at least 20 of those have been found through contact tracing, and another 18 found through our Sentinel testing effort. So clearly that percentage increases the further into the pandemic we get. And finally, I would just say our focus for this planning period, in addition to our testing and tracing, is really working with our schools. This last week, the governor's office provided guidance to our K-12 partners about their planning process for reopening schools in the fall. And we had a meeting with the ESD yesterday and anticipate a regular structure to work with each of the districts in Lane County, all of the public schools and private schools, as they prepare their plans that are due to the state no later than August and do require review by public health. So we are working closely with our schools and then with the University of Oregon as they start to bring students back onto campus as well. We met with them yesterday to review plans for residence halls and continue to work closely with the university to make sure that as things open up, that we are able to do that in a safe way. So I think I'll pause there. Of course, I'll hang out for questions later, but I'll turn it over to the county administrator now.
Thank you, Karen, Chair and Commissioners. And I'll just do a brief update. Yesterday, we opened up our Lane County recovery operations. It's being led by Patience Winningham, our emergency manager. There are 4 general areas that we're focused on. Those include reentry, economic, housing and social services. And then we have public information support by our PIO, Devin Ashbridge, and financial support by our finance manager, Robert Tintle. On reentry, Mike Finch, our CIO, is leading the reentry work, and that is a coordinated effort between all of our departments to manage and create various tiers. We have 3 different tiers that we've identified for bringing different services back online to on-site work. And so that process is being implemented. I think as we've shared with the board, we're continuing to have as many of our employees work remotely for as long as we can to manage the ability of those that need to be on site to be able to have at least 6 feet of distance there. So we're collecting data and identifying those tiered plans and working on the final state of reentry and what that looks like. On the economic side, we're gathering our lists of rural community projects that are in need of funding to align with our regional efforts and grant applications. We're finalizing our partnership with Bring and the Oregon Manufacturing Extension Partnership, as we've included and the board just approved funding in the next fiscal year for technical assistance to businesses, particularly through a new robust partnership with Bring and Oregon Manufacturing Extension Partnership. We're working with our internal and external partners to prepare for deployment of Business Oregon grant funds from round 1 and 2. We're preparing to apply for round 3 of Business Oregon business grants, as well as the new programs that have been made available by the latest e-board action. And we are planning on July 7th to have an update with Austin Ramirez and Alex Kyler on various grant funding sources, grants that we're pursuing, we've received, and seeking some guidance and direction from the board on additional focus areas. We're gathering letters of support for rural broadband grant applications from Cresswell, Coburg, Lowell, and Veneta. So that's some of the work happening in the economic section. On housing, Sarai Johnson and Austin Ramirez is leading our economic recovery efforts. On housing, Sarai Johnson is focused in leading that effort. We're working with our emergency support function with cross-jurisdictional partners to develop lessons learned and opportunities for improvement from our transition of the respite shelters. We've received information from Dev Northwest regarding our foreclosure prevention strategy and the needs for Lane County and the ways in which we can engage there. We are connecting with service providers who are working together on a collaborative approach to shelter and housing, both in the city of Eugene and city of Springfield. We're coming up with a partnership for funding for foreclosure prevention. And so city of Eugene, Springfield, and our Human Service Division in Lane County are all working on funding for that prevention work. The United Way has been asked to create a fund where community members, businesses, faith communities, and other 501c3s can send donations to support short and long-term sheltering options. And finally, our social services recovery effort led by Steve Manila. We've updated I think the board has received the update that there has been an additional allocation of state fundings for rent assistance. We'll receive beginning in July through December of this year, additional monthly funds to be distributed. These are pass-through dollars to be distributed as part of our rental assistance program. We to date have approved, I believe, over 1,500 applications for rent assistance, and current applicants have been referred to the nonprofit providers, and so we anticipate that will continue, and really pleased the state has made more funding available for rental assistance. So we're going to sort of provide these updates on a regular basis for the board, both on the public health response and then our ongoing recovery efforts. But today we have a special guest, the Sheriff Cliff Harold, and his team are here to present to you COVID recovery efforts, particularly focused on law enforcement and jail. And so I'll turn it over to the Sheriff to take the additional time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Buck and Commissioners. As you, I'm sure, recall, I sent a letter to the Commissioners back in early April describing the operational changes that our office had made in response to the pandemic. And we also established a frequently asked questions page on our website at about the same time to try and make sure that we were able to answer as best able questions that folks had about how our office was operating during this time. A lot of things have changed since early April. In early April, things were changing daily, multiple times daily sometimes. But two of the things that I think are the most significant, and I thank you that we get to provide some update to you all today. First would be the availability of testing certainly is significantly more available today than it was when I sent the letter in April. And then two, we've had this time to continue to refine our operational changes, and particularly in the way that we operate the Lane County Jail. So, for example, we have been able to work through and determine what our sort of optimal capacity is, numbers of folks who are housed in the jail that still allow us the flexibility to respond should the need arise within the jail. And so we're operating at about 260 right now. That allows us to not put any more people in the dorm than what it's normal, than half of its normal occupancy. And it also allows us to reserve some single cells so that in the event that we need to empty a dorm and clean it or take responsive action because of anybody that has symptoms of the COVID-19, we still have the room within the facility to do that. And so 260 is what we've determined our capacity for current operations, gives us that flexibility that we need. And with respect to testing, I just want to say that the partnership we've had with Lane County Public Health has been tremendous. We really have appreciated their availability to us for checking in, consulting, all of the shop over there, Dr. Ludke and the rest of the public health team has been tremendous. And so as testing became available, we have established a robust testing program in the jail. We've had 404 adults in custody have been tested. And at this point in time, we've only had one positive result. And I'll just share a little bit of information about that, is that the individual was in custody at a state institution, was transported to Lane County in order to participate in a court hearing. And our policies that we have in place worked very well. As the individual came down to Lane County, he was tested. He participated in the court hearing, and then he was transported back to the state institution. So he spent one night in our facility. It was after we had already returned him to the state institution that we got his test result back. He was a positive. But because of the policies we have in place, that's still been the only positive, and that event is a few weeks old now. So very happy to report that. Captain Clint Riley is here with me. He's obviously engaged in the day-to-day operational detail over there, and so he's going to provide a little more in-depth detail for you.
Yeah, good morning. So I'm going to go back and just kind of review some of the protocols we've initiated and we continue to implement as we work through the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, we implemented significant operational changes in accordance to the Center for Disease Control, Oregon Health Authority, Lane County Public Health, and our jail medical provider, WellPath. The state circuit court employees who work in pretrial services at our jail continue to work to reduce the number of inmates being held in the jail, and make decisions about pretrial defendants' ability to be released on release agreements with the court. All of our sentenced individuals are reviewed for placement in all alternative programs, such as the Sheriff's Work Crew, in order to serve their jail sentences out of custody. Maintaining this reduction in our total in-custody population allows us to continue to limit the number of inmates housed in our dormitory areas, and inmates can spread out and practice social distancing. All inmates in the jail are offered masks, encouraged to social distance, and we ask them to sit at every other seat during meal services and remind them to wash their hands and sanitize their areas. All of our areas have signs posted both in English and Spanish to further reiterate the message. We've increased our laundry exchange, and inmate clothing and linens have also been increased. The public visiting areas, phones, attorney-client rooms, legal library, and the courtroom are sanitized after every visit. Social visiting has been temporarily suspended to protect the facility from outside contact. However, inmates are provided access to video visitation through our Telmate system and are currently receiving minutes of telephone and video visitation each week at no charge to the inmates. We continue to offer attorneys in-person meetings through a glass barrier with their clients, as well as facilitating attorney consultations using technology. These technologies are also being utilized to facilitate court appearances for inmates housed in the jail. We are fortunate enough to have medical staff in our facility 24/7. Prior to COVID-19, all of our custodies were screened by medical personnel during the book-in process. To decrease the chances of an asymptomatic person entering the building, we moved the screening process to occur outside of the building before the custody exit and arresting officer's patrol car. After that screening, all new individuals booked in are offered a COVID-19 test and placed on an observation for 7 days. During this observation period, they are housed in a single cell, have solo dayroom time, and solo movement throughout our facility. If a new custody refuses to take a COVID test or presents at the time of booking with symptoms related to COVID-19, special precautions are taken based on the medical assessment and protocols of WellPAP and guidelines from the CDC. Those refusing to take a test, presenting with symptoms, or those who have traveled to areas with large number of COVID-19 cases are quarantined or isolated based on the determination of our medical provider. Special cells have been reserved for quarantine and isolation where the inmate will remain there for 14 days past potential exposure, and they are monitored by our medical staff for signs and symptoms twice daily. Yeah, that's the overview of where we're at with the jail, and we continue to work with all of our partners, as the sheriff said, and the testing process is working really well.
Taking advantage of the opportunity to present some information to the board, I also wanted to share a few comments just with respect to the national attention to improving law enforcement services in our country, and wanting to present some information for you all about what's true of right here in Lane County, your Lane County Sheriff's Office. And so just to walk through a few things, I am very proud of the organization, the Sheriff's Office here in Lane County, and the way that our folks are internally motivated to serve this community. I'm very proud of the culture of our organization in fulfilling our mission, which is to conserve the peace. We do some things that are specifically done here that I can't necessarily speak to across the country. I don't know that other law enforcement agencies do or don't do these things, but I do know about this agency. And so I just want to share a few things with you. First would be just the really robust screening process that we utilize before we hire a deputy sheriff. We hire less than 5% of our applicant pool for deputy sheriff. We have a strong emphasis on evaluating character, and through our interview processes and the psychological exam, which Lane County Sheriff's Office has used for multiple decades, even before the recent state legislative action that made it a requirement. Once we do invite somebody into the organization, part of that process is to sit down with me where I talk to them about the culture of this organization and the way that we treat each other in this organization, and the way that we communicate and interact with our community. We talk to them as soon as they are hired, and we provide them with a new employee training orientation training week. Classes in that very first week include a class we call PRP, Polite, Respectful, Professional, We have de-escalation classes. We have multiple different leaders in our organization who are visiting with our new deputies and reminding them that our agency culture is that we treat folks, whether they're in custody at the jail or out in the public, we treat these folks as if they're our own family member. And we have to remember that it could be any one of our family members who finds themselves in our jail. People are people, and people make mistakes. And we would want to make sure that we're treating people the way we would want our family members treated in there. And that is a message that gets repeated over and over as we invite people into our organization as deputy sheriffs. We have multiple employees who are trained to be trainers in de-escalation. We've had 63 of our deputies go through a 40-hour crisis intervention training course, and multiple other training opportunities in de-escalation. The point that I really want to make, and part of what I do, in fact, I visited with a new deputy applicant today, and I really enjoy getting to visit with these folks. And part of the visit is the fact that as a law enforcement agency, we're pretty unique. We're not the only one, but we're pretty unique in that we initially hire folks to come to work in a jail. And multiple folks who are applying for law enforcement jobs are applying all over the place, and oftentimes for police agencies. And so they're envisioning a job driving around in a patrol car serving their community. And so I talked to them about the reasons why we start people in the jail and the benefits that we believe that we get from it. I think it's really important to focus on that because I am very, very convinced that that is a huge part of the culture of our organization, and it is why we interact with the community in the way that we do. So not only do we provide deputies training, but the year or 2 or 5 years that they spend working in the jail is also continuing to build on that foundation of training. I oftentimes talk to people about the difference between a very short 5-minute encounter on the street using, dressed in a uniform, which expresses authority, versus working in the jail where you spend 8 hours dressed in a uniform, which is expressing authority, but trying to convince folks to follow the rules and get along. And not only do our jail deputies spend 8 hours or a 12-hour shift, but they're going to go home and they're going to come back. And oftentimes these very same people are going to be there, and they're going to continue to need to verbally engage them to ask them to follow the rules. And as deputies do that, especially new deputies, I'm asking you to picture in your mind the difference between a new deputy working in a housing area with a couple of other deputies, having the opportunity to watch them interact with folks that are in custody, to observe what effective communication looks like, to observe a technique and think to themselves, oh, that was pretty effective. Or sometimes to observe a technique and think, well, that wasn't so effective. But they're all right there together. And a deputy has that opportunity, for a year or 2 before they come to patrol, versus a brand new patrol person who doesn't work at an agency that has this opportunity to build that skill. They work with their field training officer for some weeks, but then they're out deployed on their own, interacting with the community. And so we just believe we have a special opportunity to provide that additional foundational training, and we're convinced that it is a huge part of who we are as an agency and the culture of our agency. And that's why we do it. Occasionally we miss out on recruits because they don't want to come to work in a jail. And so people don't apply at our organization. And we do recognize that it's additional work for us. We get somebody all trained up to work in a corrections facility, and then 2 years into their career, they ask to come to patrol. It takes us another year to train them to do the patrol job. That's a lot of investment, but it's worth it because of the type of service we get out of the folks that we employ, because they've had that opportunity to build those skills. So very, very proud of this organization. A couple other things just to sort of highlight that we hear about use of force reporting, and I want to make sure the board knows that our agency has had a specific use of force report for decades. We have a robust use of force reporting and review system. So it goes through multiple layers of review, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and chief deputy. All use of force reports are then referred to the training manager so that they can evaluate whether or not we need to make adjustments to our training, or whether it's an opportunity to use this example as a good example for training. One of the things that I've heard from folks is, do we discipline folks who are outside of our use of force policy? The answer is yes. I can show a disciplinary history of taking disciplinary action against folks when they are outside of the use of force policy. And additionally, we can show a disciplinary history of taking action against deputies who failed to intervene when a third deputy was outside of the use of force policy. And so that's a question that I see being asked. And yes, we have done that. We can demonstrate that we have done that. We do that because This is important to us. This is foundational to who we are as an organization. A couple other highlights from sort of what we hear nationally. It's oftentimes referred to in the media as a chokehold. It's titled rather sterilely as a lateral vascular neck restraint. And I can assure you that this agency has not had anyone use that for 15 years. That's as far back as our current use of force reporting system goes, and we went and checked. And I can also assure you that for as long as I've been a part of this agency, which is over 25 years, we have taught that sort of move would only be acceptable in the same circumstance that a deputy would be allowed to withdraw their firearm and utilize it. So it's the highest level of use of force. It's a use of deadly physical force. And that's the way it's been discussed in this organization for decades. I do get the impression from my early years, I was hired in 1995, and I worked with deputies that I think certainly gave me the perception that move, that hold, used to be used quite often, maybe in the 70s or 80s, but I can assure you that it is not and has not for decades here. A national use of force database is something that I hear a lot about, and I want to tell you that we were one of the first agencies that voluntarily enrolled in the national use of force database as soon as it became available. I've read reports that fewer than 50% of the police agencies, law enforcement agencies across the US are enrolled, but we did enroll as soon as it was available. We report those monthly, and that's hosted by the FBI, the use of force database, national use of force database. And then the last thing, and I appreciate comments that I've already heard folks make about the defund the police narrative. And I know the board knows this because I know you've heard it from me and you heard it from the sheriff before me. We talk frequently about the need for mental health resources. And in fact, we chose to engage WellPath, our medical provider in the jail, for additional mental health resources, 6 FTE to work with mental health resources inside the jail. We have instituted inmate wellness services inside our jail. And we have really reimagined what corrections work used to look like. The individuals who were the most difficult to manage got out of their cell the least. Now we have a multidisciplinary meeting where medical staff, mental health staff, and deputy sheriffs are meeting, and they're talking about the most difficult people that are in custody to manage, and they're making an individualized plan for those people in how best to manage them. And I've had the ability to talk with deputies who have been working in our jail for decades, and they can tell me anecdotally, they know this individual used to get booked in and require a tremendous amount of resources and sometimes use of force because they were difficult to manage. And now that we've reimagined that and we're putting them into inmate wellness services, and they're getting out of their cell more often and they're participating in things like yoga, the deputies can report to me, you know, I'm just using the name Joe. Joe used to be really hard to manage, and now Joe doesn't require as much management from us because we are utilizing these new techniques. And so we're proud of those things. We would love to see more availability of mobile crisis response out in the county, that sort of the CAHOOTS model or something like that. We have a mobile crisis response project in Western Lane County that I think you've heard about. It's been extremely effective in the city limits of Florence. I've talked personally with Tom Turner. He loves when an individual is disrupting, let's say, the McDonald's in the city of Florence, and they're suffering from some mental health issues or possibly some intoxication issues. The Florence Police loves the fact that there's this mobile crisis response worker who can go and engage that individual in conversation rather than a police officer. The difficulty we have, and I think the board understands this, is keeping that individual safe when we try to deploy that same methodology out in rural Lane County. Because unfortunately, sometimes folks who are struggling with their mental health do take violent actions. It's unfortunate. Oftentimes it's because they perceive a threat that others wouldn't perceive. But the reality is, you have a mobile crisis response worker, and this is true of CAHOOTS. CAHOOTS can go and operate inside the city of Eugene or Springfield because Eugene or Springfield could have police officers there to keep them safe in a very short period of time if they needed it. And that's true of mobile crisis response inside of Florence. But once that individual is traveling up Highway 36 to Deadwood or Swiss Home, the closest deputy sheriff is, if we're lucky, 30 minutes away. And so we're engaged in those conversations about how do we deploy this resource outside of the city but also account for their safety. And we don't have a magic answer. We've had a lot of meetings to talk about it. We've developed a plan where when the sheriff's office has a call in Western Lane County where this sort of resource may be beneficial, we'll contact them, we'll brief them, we'll see if maybe they could make a phone call to the individual and have phone conversation. Ultimately, if the crisis response worker says, yeah, I think I can help, but I need to go out there, we're going to say, okay, let us get a deputy sheriff to meet you. We'll meet you in Mapleton and we'll travel together. What's going to be really hard is that we're going to say, we've got a deputy on the way, we'll meet you in Mapleton. And then we're going to end up having to call them and say, hey, we had to divert our deputy. We had an in-progress domestic assault going on. We'll call you as soon as we have another deputy available. And that crisis response worker is going to be sitting in Mapleton for an hour. And we're going to call them back and say, okay, we've got a deputy on the way again, but this deputy's coming from Cottage Grove, so we've got a little while to get there. And that could happen multiple times. We already experience this frequently when the child welfare workers from Department of Human Services want to go out and do a home check, but they need a deputy to keep them safe. And so they'll park somewhere and wait and wait and wait and wait for us to get a deputy free to go do that. That's the reality. And I'm sorry, I know that you all know this, but that's our reality. 3 deputies, most shifts covering the 4,600 square miles. We want those services. I can tell you as a deputy out on patrol, multiple times we would call and ask if Cahoots could perhaps come out 2 doors down from the city limits to provide resources just outside the city. And so we want that sort of resource available. But as you all know, there's just no room. We are already so insufficiently funded that there's just no room for the sheriff's office to carve that out of our patrol budget to provide that. One very last thing, I said that was going to be my last thing. This one really will be. I have heard just a little bit about civilian oversight and use of force in law enforcement. And I just share with the board that the sheriff, as an elected office, has a fantastic connection with the public that they serve, in that there's no need for an intermediary between the voting public and the sheriff or the residents of the county, whether they vote or not. If they have a question or a concern about the way the sheriff's office is being operated, they can call and I'll have a conversation with them. They can send me an email and I'll give them a response. They can come in and sit down and we can visit over a cup of coffee. And every 4 years, they get the opportunity to say, whether or not they think the sheriff's office is being operated well, or frankly, they can exercise that option even earlier than every 4 years. And so I just want to share too that last year, 2019 calendar year, 65,551 calls for service for patrol deputies. When I take out the complaints related to either not responding at all to a theft or it took too long, if you take out those complaints, 12 complaints, 65,551 calls for service, 12 complaints. Of those 12 complaints in 2019, 1 was related to a use of force, and that was made by an individual who was arrested for DUI. Their version of events was disputed not just by the deputies who made the arrest, but also by 2 additional witnesses. So we have a culture in our organization that's a little bit different. We have an opportunity to train people differently because we operate a jail. We have a terrific relationship with our community, and we have very little incidents of complaints with respect to the way we do that work. So I think I've taken up more than my time, but I appreciate having the opportunity to share some information with the board.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I got Commissioner Sorensen and then Commissioner Farr.
Thank you so much. Chair, I'm going to ask, do you want to keep this first on Karen or first on the sheriff while he's here, or how do you want to do that?
Either one. They're all here with us for this particular act.
I do have questions for both the sheriff and for Ms. Gaffney. And Ms. Gaffney, I sent you an email the other day asking about the testing and the problems with testing. And among the questions I asked were related to why we are not doing the level of testing that we said we would do. And specifically, we were setting up a goal of 500 tests per day. We're not getting that average. We're falling behind each day on the totality of that 500 per day testing. So I asked questions like, is it because there's a lack of tests? Is it a lack of qualified people to administer the test? Is it a lack of qualified people to process the test? Is it a lack of chemicals to process the test? Could you tell us why we're not able to reach the goal of 500 tests per day and what we would have to do in order to do it? What resources, what barriers are there?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, thanks for the question. And I would say it's not a simple answer, and it might be a little bit of all of the above. Certainly it's multifactorial, and I reached out to our physician, Dr. Lysandra Guzman, who's been leading our testing efforts to get her opinion on that question too. And she lifted up a couple things. First, certainly there is limited capacity in our public health surveillance team. So I've mentioned in the last several reports, our group of swabbers who go out can only process so many people. So there is some bottleneck there in terms of our targeted populations. We continue to bring on additional temporary staff and recruit volunteers to help with that. So that certainly is a limiting factor. I think there's also an interesting cultural piece in terms of expectations in the community. And, you know, how do I want to say this? So the state has set the expectation for providers that they're to test people who are symptomatic and who would therefore believe they might have COVID. And so I wonder if there just aren't that many people who are presenting to their providers with those symptoms. The bulk of our tests are always to come through our provider system. So I don't know if because early on testing was so limited, people decided that for the most part, symptoms aren't severe, and so they aren't approaching their providers to get tests, or if we frankly just don't have that many people who are in fact COVID positive, and certainly some of the symptoms of things like flu and other things that might appear to be similar to COVID are less prevalent in the community right now. We do have limits on lab testing capacity, and we've talked about that in the past. So it is still true that McKinsey-Willamette and Peace Health can only handle a certain number of tests each day, and we're working hard to keep them at capacity. As you know from the discussion at last week's board meeting, we've been working with the University of Oregon in the hopes that some different testing technology and capacity will come on board soon this summer, and will be able to allow us as a community to process significantly more tests. So I think that is a piece of it. So I guess I would say it's not a single answer, and we are still most days above 400 tests a day. So yes, our goal is 500, and we haven't reached that yet. But we continue to increase in our number of tests, and I'm confident that we are going to cross that 500 test threshold soon.
Very good. And one other question before I pass, and I would like to be called on a second round, but my question to you, Karen, is in light of the increased number of positive infections in the county, are we contemplating revoking our phase 2 application? How does that work? And could you give us some insight on how to properly inform state authorities about the level of infection in Lane County and whether or not we need to step back from our phase 2 application?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, thank you. You may recall at the end of last week, I sent each member of the board the state's dashboard for how they compare the criteria for reopening across all 36 of Oregon counties. And that document is also posted on the website for anyone in the community who would like to look at how we are doing each week. They score every county on each of those gating criteria. Last week, Lane County was green in all of those categories because it doesn't look just at your number of cases and whether you got an additional case or 2 cases, but really looks at a variety of factors, including how many of your cases are epidemiologically linked to other cases, what's your positivity rate in testing, what's your hospitalization rate look like. So every Oregon county is scored on those every week by the state. As we've talked before, all of our data is actually held in the state's database. So they are very familiar with where each county is in terms of case identification, tracking, tracing, all of those pieces related to the pandemic. So based on that, at this point, I believe Lane County continues to be progressing well. We knew that there were going to be additional cases that we found in the community. And I think that people in Lane County are doing a really great job of protecting themselves and each other in the ways that they can. We're wearing face masks, washing our hands frequently. I know as I have gone into businesses that are open, people are conscientious about providing hand sanitizer and physical distancing. And those are the tools we really need to be able to stay open.
Thank you. And like I said, Chair, I'd like to be called on the second round and make a few comments on what the sheriff said. Thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Ms. Gaffney and Steve, Mr. Mcalister, I don't have a lot of questions for you based on your report this morning because I read the emails that you send me each day that really gives me a lot of the talking points that we're covering today. You do a great job, Karen, of getting the information out that really answers most of the questions that people ask me, including the number of tests, including positives, including negative tests. It's a wealth of information in your emails that I get every day. And Mr. Mcalister, your email, which I'm the one that I got a little bit after 10 p.m. yesterday, you were worried that it was a bit lengthy, but it was really full of information. I think anybody who's not read that, you address it to all Lane County employees, and I believe that everybody gets it. You must have a tremendous opening rate because I hear from a lot of people that they glean information that you pass along in that daily report, and we will miss it for the next couple of days since you're going to be out of town. I'm presuming you'll probably at least be in touch one way or another. But once again, I don't have very many questions because you provide the answers on a regular basis every single day. Thank you for that. And very briefly regarding the sheriff, Sheriff and Captain Riley, thank you for your presentation today. It was just a week ago that I asked Mr. Mcalister to work with you on making the presentation today, both on COVID inside the jail and response inside the jail, and on use of force. One thing that really helped me to be confident you could prepare the report is that Sheriff Harold, you're not doing things for the first time as a sheriff. I've worked with 4 different sheriffs. One of them is now the U.S. Marshal. One of them is now the chief of police in Florence. One of them is retired, and you all had pretty much the same approach. You talk about it being decades long, the approach regarding use of force, for instance. But there is one significant thing, and Mr. Mcalister, you actually sent this out in yesterday's email, but I keep it in my office, and that is this. Can you see that right there? It's our public safety wheel. All arrows point toward the center, which is mental health and community services. That's not a new thing for the Sheriff's Department. It is a part of the culture that's been established, and you described it a little bit in the training process, Sheriff, where the new recruits, new deputies spend usually at least a year in the jail, not working on 10-minute encounters, but working on 8-hour encounters with people who are in some place they would rather not be, people who really do need to adhere to the rules in order to keep the place that they're residing a place that's safe for everybody who lives there. So it's not a new thing for you. And I'll point out the middle being mental health and community services. I do have this one quick question. You did not touch on your work with our Human Services Department and with LCBH, Lane County Behavioral Health. I'll be hearing your voices this week at the Mental Health Summit. Sheriff or Captain Riley, can you talk about your involvement in the Mental Health Summit and what exactly that does for the department?
I'll just say very briefly that it's a monthly opportunity to get in a room full of folks who are engaged in this part of providing services to the community, for-profit, nonprofit, governmental, court-related, and law enforcement, all focused on trying to find an alternative to using the jail for folks who are suffering with severe and persistent mental illness. And so we've long been engaged in that process. We continue to engage in that process. We're hopeful that that services in that area will continue to improve so that the folks who are housed in the jail are there rightly engaged in the criminal justice system because of behavior they've intended to participate in, rather than using the criminal justice system, which is not well designed at all for folks who are struggling with mental illness. And I just have to give Captain Clint Riley some huge praise in the way that he engages, not only in that monthly mental health meeting, but in multiple subcommittee meetings, working on things like the county's grant application for medication-assisted treatment within the jail, and the county's joint application for an impacts grant related to mental health services. And again, he's participating because he's a subject matter expert, and he's hoping to help us as a complete system to provide a better way to treat folks who are suffering from mental illness before they ever get to his jail. So as the jail captain, he's spending a lot of time trying to help folks find ways to not bring those people into his jail and into a situation where he's trying to manage them. So is there anything you want to add? Okay, I think we'll leave those comments there.
Well, thank you. And I know you could go on all day about it because the Mental Health Summit, I hear you conversing with psychiatrists, for instance. I hear you conversing with providers. I hear you conversing with judges at the Mental Health Summit. And it really is impressive to know that the LCSO expends as much resource and energy as it does in making sure that you're doing exactly what you say, diverting people from jail and into the services that they need, the mental health services. It's often said that you have the largest mental health clinic in the county, which is the jail, and that greater than 50% of the people who are residing in the jail are suffering from some form of behavioral health issue. Probably the number is far greater than 50%. And to know that you are putting that kind of resource into not only taking care of them to avoid jail, but once they are encountering the jail, to make certain that they're receiving the services that they can receive in order to not go back to jail once they are released. So thank you very much. I have a lot of questions, Sheriff Harold, but I think others may have questions. And thank you for making me personally very proud of the Lane County Sheriff's Department.
Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Sheriff Harold, for making Commissioner Farr very proud of the Lane County Sheriff's Department. I agree with him. And I think most of your discussion, we have the opportunity to speak offline about. So I want to, for me, this is a little difficult. I hear at a minimum 3 separate discussions going on under this COVID-19 response and recovery. I'd like to speak to a couple of them. Before I do that, I'm sure there are good reasons for this, but I would like to remind staff that we had a protocol for presenting under this item that we're drifting away from. If, because we're in phase 2 of reopening, you think a different protocol in terms of items you will give us status reports on is due, that's fine. I'd like to hear it. But we're really, I feel a real sense of drift here. Karen, and that's a request. That's just a request that if we're not going to report so we can keep comparing apples to apples to apples, please let us know what we should be looking at for comparisons moving forward. You mentioned, I think, Karen, and correct me if I'm incorrect, that you expected to reach that 500 daily test figure by this summer. Is that correct?
Chair Buck, Vice Chair Birdie, I would absolutely anticipate that's true. I know we continue to increase our testing each week, and so I would imagine that will be true.
So does this summer not start in 5 days?
And Chair Buck and Vice Chair Bernie, when you asked the question, you didn't suggest we would be there at the first day of summer.
Okay, so under the question is a tad bit of frustration, because we've been hearing for over a month now that that's the target and we're getting close. And so I just want to point out there's still the same sense of urgency I have felt from the beginning. I'm still feeling it. Yesterday, our president said if we tested less, we would have less cases. And personally, I believe that from what I understand, and it's incomplete, that if we tested more, we would have more knowledge about where cases are. And if we tested more over time, we would see less percentage of those tests being positive. I think Lane County is in a great place, and I thank you and Dr. Lepke and everyone for that. But nonetheless, I still want to get back to that. Last week, I asked you about reporting on and having plans for the area that obviously is where the most vulnerable, as data tells us, at least thus far, which are nursing homes. Is there any progress on reporting on that or having plans for nursing homes in the area?
There is, Vice Chair Bernie, and in the update that I sent last night, I believe I included a link, and I'll go back and check. In
I
case
apologize. I'm not up on last night's emails, Karen. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to be able to direct you back to where you could find some more information. The Oregon Health Authority has finally released a document on long-term care facility testing, and it is dated June 12th, and I believe the governor's press release went out yesterday on that document. So it's a long-term care facility testing plan that outlines roles and responsibilities for the care facilities, as well as labs, local public health, and the state agencies, both the Oregon Health Authority and the Department of Human Services. In this plan, they have, their objective is by September 30th to ensure that all residents and staff at all 685 nursing, residential care, and assisted living facilities licensed by DHS in Oregon be tested at least once, and then each of those facilities will be responsible for ongoing testing of their staff. In my review of this plan, it looks like the state has prioritized particular regions where they have had significant outbreaks in those facilities, and Lane County is not one of those. Again, I feel blessed that we have not been one of those counties. So they are prioritizing for testing first in Multnomah, Washington, Clackamas, Yamhill, Marion, and Polk, to account for the fact that the vast majority of long-term care outbreaks have been in those counties. So they will do those counties first, and then they will proceed to do the rest of Oregon. So I would, in looking at their draft timeline in the plan, it looks like the rest of us are slated for like weeks 9 and 10 of this effort that starts to roll out on the 24th. So that is the plan as we know it now.
Thank you so much, Karen. I really appreciate that. Just a few additional remarks, if I may, Chair, because I'm not going to need to come back for a second round. In terms of phase 2, I just want to share that that staff have been hugely supportive, and now we are supporting the Springfield Chamber as they have convened a group to facilitate reopening amongst many businesses here that have many questions, that want to do it safely, but want to move forward, and that's occurring. And I thank both Mr. Mokrahysky and Mr. Ramirez for your support with that. I also want to point out that as we look at economic development, there are several local companies that have pivoted and are producing masks and are producing hand sanitizers and surface sanitizers. And I also want to state that whenever all other things being equal, we can give our county business and local businesses can give their business to local producers, as we're talking about having more security over supply chain. That's something that we should keep in mind. I would also like to share that a few weeks ago, Karen, because I know how hard you, Dr. Ludke, your staffs, volunteers, everyone is exhausted, working, hours beyond normal hours, attempting to keep Lane County in the really enviable position we are in this environment. I was wanting to support you when I made some statements critical of an op-ed, and I made very strong statements. I would just like to share with the board that subsequent to that, I have reached out to Councilperson Semple and apologized for the strength of those statements and yet why I made them. And I would like to share with you that she also apologized because she did not mean to be critical. She did not mean to have a statement that had an ill effect on the morale of staff. And I feel very good that communication occurred, and I wanted to share it with everyone. And finally, and so thank you all. And then to the second piece of what I perceive a three-piece discussion, Mr. Mokraheisky, you mentioned that July 7th, I think, you're going to share with the board various grant opportunities and how the county's assessing, aligning where we can put our priorities, and you look for that from board members. So I just want to state for further discussion at another point that two priorities I have that I haven't heard discussed is aligning with securing more resources, one for the opportunity to leverage significant private dollars and put solar on a lot of municipal and public rooftops. There's a methodology for doing that where we can leverage private groups that would be more than happy to do that front end work, identify qualified sites, organized financing, and public dollars or grant dollars we're able to receive could leverage usually 9 or 10 times that amount in private dollars for clean energy, so that we could make a visible and dramatic and job creating statement in this county as we're looking at economic recovery. And the same thing as a priority, if the board agrees, with dollars that can allow us to really jumpstart the process of doing recycling at Short Mountain and more methane capture. I think that there are resources that if your staff finds them, and I look forward to the July 7th report, that if we could align those two economic development items, I think it would be huge. And forgive my biases, but the sooner we can get bricks and mortar out there and for people to see it, the better. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair.
I just want to remind everybody, we do have other items on our agenda, but I wanted to reserve enough time for Commissioner Bozovich and myself to have any comments. Commissioner Bozovich, did you have any?
I'll be very quick. And speaking of drift, I think we're getting into drift there, Commissioner Burney. Just want to say—
I respectfully disagree, sir. Okay.
Yeah. I just want to say I'm proud of the work our public health department has done addressing this emergency, and I'm also proud of the work the sheriff's office has done in the jail and addressing the COVID crisis. I participate in COVID-19 public safety update phone calls with the local public safety coordinating council, so I was aware of those efforts, so I won't make a lot of comment on them. And I just want to also say I appreciate that he took a little bit of time to address use of force and some of the other issues around training with his department. Although I do kind of have to agree it wasn't exactly under this agenda item, but it was good for the public to hear that. And that's all I got to say today.
Ms. Gabney, I have a question about antibodies, because I was, like many people, watching the news yesterday evening, and there was a segment of interviewing Nova Health where people can come in and get tested for antibodies. But what I didn't hear was any discussion about the reliability of those antibody tests. I was under the impression that they were not completely reliable. And so I wanted to get your professional opinion about that.
Chair Buck, this is one of those times when I wish I had Dr. Ludke here, because I know he could go into much greater detail with you. And in fact, what I think I will do is have an initial response now, and then we'll follow up via email to the board with more information on that. Just because I haven't posed that question to him in the last couple of weeks, I would say in general, the last conversation we had, he definitely did express concerns about those tests, and it was both in terms of reliability as the testing methodology is moving forward, but also in what information people might assume from that. And for instance, some people I know are just curious. However, there are others who would want to assume that they have some degree of immunity based on a result of an antibody test. And I think that the jury is absolutely still out on what kind of immunity is conferred and for how long and all of those questions. So we wouldn't want anyone to change their behavior in terms of physical distancing, wearing masks, washing their hands, all of those behaviors based on a positive antibody test result. So that's also a piece of our concern just from a public health perspective. Ultimately, I think it will be useful information for the public health community to have that. But I will talk with Dr. Ludke and get a brief update for you on his assessment of the state of antibody testing and get that to the board.
That would be helpful, because I think from the segment, it inferred that, you know, the reporter herself was the one that got tested, and it inferred that it was 100% that she had never had the virus. And of course, she was disappointed because she wanted to be able to say that she had it and didn't have any symptoms and was good to go. And I just want to make sure that that is really what's happening when people go out and get antibody testing, and the reliability of that as a public health response. Okay, well, with that, Commissioner Sorensen had one final question, and then after that, let's move on to the rest of our agenda.
Thank you very much. I'll make this very brief. I wasn't able to ask these questions of Sheriff Harold, but I'll just summarize it by saying, first of all, I appreciate his willingness to be open to any Lane County resident that wants to ask questions about the Sheriff's Office operation. That really shows tremendous accessibility and transparency. He's reached out to me. I'm sure he's reached out to all of the commissioners, as well as responding to constituent inquiries. So I think that does distinguish our law enforcement and corrections function from those of other governments, such as the federal government or city governments or even state government. So thanks so much for that. The other thing is that in common parlance, things like the chokehold that have been in the national news have apparently been banned by Lane County's Sheriff's Office, except in instances where there's a threat to the officer's life, and the use of a chokehold is in the same category as the use of a firearm by an officer. And also, I think it is worth repeating that Sheriff Harold mentioned that the National Use of Force database is something that police agencies around the country should participate in. And I get it, only half of those agencies do, and we are among the agencies that do. Also, the strong relationship between social services and law enforcement, and I'm really happy to hear all of the efforts that are made to try to incorporate law enforcement with social services. Really appreciate that. And I'll just close out by saying it's phenomenal that the Lane County Sheriff's Office accepts 5% of the applicants for positions. I'm not too familiar with acceptance rates that have applied in my life, except the acceptance rates at law schools, which I'll just mention briefly. Yale, 8.2%, Stanford, 9.7%, Harvard, 12.5%. These are 2021 figures. And the University of Oregon for 2020 was 50.4% of applicants were accepted at the University of Oregon School of Law. So that gives you an idea of just how elite being in the Lane County Sheriff's Office is. And I'd like to also point out that I have a personal friend that after graduating from law school, applied for and was hired as a Lane County Sheriff's deputy. So I know that there's a lot of really sharp people of all different backgrounds, and I appreciate all the good work of our Sheriff's Office. Thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for the presentation and update on our COVID-19 response and recovery. You notice we changed the title just slightly to incorporate recovery, but maybe we should evaluate that a little bit more at team meetings. So we'll go to item 7B, Order 20-06-16-10 in the matter of awarding a contract for renovation of the Medication Assisted Treatment Program Clinic and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute a contract. And with us, I believe we have Mike Pinwell, Capital Projects Manager.
Thank you, Chair Buck, Commissioners. We also have Kachina Inman, who's here to answer any questions that may need to be answered by H&HS staff. You're familiar with the MAT program, the purchase of the building that was approved at the December 3rd board meeting, or December 17th board meeting. Closed on that property in January 7th, and then embarked on the detailed design process at that point. And so I'll just focus primarily on the contractual aspect of this, and as well as the opportunity to use this project to do a little more education on the community benefits framework and how to apply those elements to our projects. In late February, based on schematic design work, we had a project budget estimate of $2.3 million for construction. We moved forward with more detailed design then at that point to complete it. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, we received a GMP, guaranteed maximum price, based on the finished design. We knew that we had added a few elements in the project. I was hoping and expecting the cost to come in around $2.5 million. The GMP came in at $2.9 million. That was higher than we wanted to expend, and that H&HS certainly wanted to support. And so we did a round of value engineering. We identified some key elements that we could eliminate that could be added back later. An example of it would be entry vestibule for the methadone treatment program clinic on the side of the building. We've scaled that down. There's still a covered entry there that will work just fine. It's and aspects like that we were able to add back to the project later. We're able to get back down to $2.6 million, and we believe that that's a supportable figure, and that the opportunity to increase treatment in the community will increase the ability to fund the project and the operations on an ongoing basis. We selected Chambers Construction to act in a construction manager general contractor context through the retainer contract with them. As I mentioned, it gave us the opportunity to explore some of the community benefit aspects that we're trying to incorporate. Chambers has built many of the clinics that Lane County has through contracts that they were awarded. They have a very robust recruitment of MWDBE firms. They recruit, and as part of the sub-bidding process, reached out to a number of local firms and MWDBE firms. They utilized 2 other retainer subcontractors to do design build work on the plumbing and electrical to save on design fees and have a very straightforward design and construction process. We utilized a design build process for the mechanical system as well, HVAC systems, by using a firm that has done extensive work on the building and is very familiar over time. And all the rest of the bid packages, sub-bid packages, were bid publicly, including the work that Chambers could self-perform. They bid against other contractors in the area on their own work. I also wanted to highlight Chambers' support of apprenticeship and training programs. They're very focused in the community on developing carpentry skill development in the middle schools and the high schools. They have a senior carpenter who supports that program and reaches out to the local schools, the Lane Workforce Partnership, the Lane Education Service District. And I've discovered in this process and in reaching out to them and other local contractors that that's some really great local contractors that are on the forefront of providing good pay, good benefits, supporting apprenticeship and training programs. And Chambers is an example.
Can you hear me?
We have somebody in the background asking if they can be heard, and they can be. You might want to mute.
Now that we can hear you, you can go ahead and mute. Thank you. And so the $2.6 million, the design team needs to refine the VE options so that Chambers can prepare a final GMP document, but we're asking approval today to not exceed $2.6 million in that process. And we have financial analysis that verifies that the billings through the drug treatment program are sufficient to support that dollar figure. And so we're asking for that approval today. With that, I'll turn it over to the board for any questions or comments.
Any questions or comments? Commissioner Bray.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hi, good.
Everything you said sounds great. Obviously, it's no secret that I'm very attached to community benefit agreements, but everything you said sounds great. I appreciate that you're using this to look at what aspects of that framework can be applied here. Here's my big concern. 7 or 8 weeks ago, we had conversation with the officers of the Lane County Building Trades, and they explained to you what they were interested in and offered their services and offered, help in any way. Have you reached out to them since?
I have not. I have been working with a consultant to develop some documents for another project that we're working on in which we want to do a pre-qualification process for contractors, and I wanted to get a draft document together before I speak with them to give me some input on that document to make sure that we're incorporating some of the things they spoke about when we were on the phone.
Oh, no, that's great. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, sir.
No, I'm done, thank you.
That's great. My concern is that you didn't reach back out to them, and really you would have had their full support for everything that you're talking about, but they wanted to be involved. And remember, we made a real big deal about involving them on the front end, just for trust and building the relationship. And I'm gonna vote yes on this, but the qualifier that I want to state is please reach out to them. Again, they're partners, they're not adversaries. Review what you have with us. I believe they'll feel a little left out, given the partnership tone of the discussion and their enthusiasm to support the county's efforts to do this. I highly encourage you to do it on this one, whether you have anything to show them specifically or not. And of course, as you recall that conversation, they were pretty flexible on everything. And the county obviously was very interested in contractors that provided full family health benefits, which was one of their things. So please don't take this as a criticism, but I think that that's an opportunity that would be lost if you didn't do that quickly at this point in the process on this particular project.
Sure, understood. The reason I didn't reach out to them on this one is that Chambers had already been selected prior to that, and I was simply using this project as a means of advancing my own understanding on what's available out in the community based on the conversation that we had several weeks ago.
Well,
and,
Chambers, I'm sorry.
Definitely going to continue to reach out to them as we develop new material for future procurement.
Chambers, my opinion, Chambers is awesome, beyond awesome. I'm gonna hear from other generals that are upset that I say that, but please reach out to them on this one and just review where you're at and get whatever input, rather than, if you would, like as soon as possible.
Will do.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this? All right, I don't see any. I would entertain a motion to approve Order 20-06-16-10.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Burney, second by Commissioner Bozovich. Any
I
discussion?
would have seconded, but I couldn't get to my microphone fast enough.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. All right, we'll go to item 7C, first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing for ordinance 20-04 in the matter of amending Chapter 8 of Lane Code to extend the term in franchise agreement with Comcast of Oregon, II, for operation of a cable communication system to December 30th, 2021, deleting and replacing their entirety ordinance of 12-07 and ordinance 18-09. And with us is Christine Moody, Budget and Financial Planning Manager.
Yes, thank you, Chair, Commissioners. I'll just give a brief background. So the franchise with Comcast is an agreement that also involves the City of Eugene, City of Springfield, and Lane County. So we were all members of that same franchise agreement. We've been working with Comcast to renew that franchise, which actually expired back in August 1st of 2018 for the first expiration. I had come to the board in 2018 and we had extended the franchise to June 30th, 2020, but we do still have two remaining outstanding issues. Since I came to you last, there have been changes in the federal law that actually change how the franchise is administered. So we're working through those. And then there's a competitive equity addendum that's been proposed by Comcast, which staff does not believe is in the best interest of the entities. And so we are negotiating on that piece. So we're asking that we extend the franchise again to the December 30th, 2021. And both cities are doing the same process to extend their ordinances also. And that's all I have.
Any questions or comments? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Just a quick question, Ms. Moody. I see that the MPC has been designated as the representative of the local franchising authority. Historically, has that not been the Cable Commission, which is a subset of the MPC?
That's my understanding.
Okay, so it's now the entire MPC, which includes LTD and City of Coburg?
Right, yeah.
Okay, that's a bit of a change then. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Yeah, thanks so much. Just to clarify, the MPC is a separate organization from the Cable Commission, and Commissioner Burney and I are delegates from the county to the Cable Commission. The Cable Commission meets in conjunction with the MPC, but it is a separate organization with separate responsibilities, and Lane Transit District and ODOT are not part of the Cable Commission. Then the Cable Commission has extensively discussed this.
Any other questions or comments? All right, I don't see any. So is there a motion to approve the first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing for ordinance 20-04 for July 7th at 10 a.m.?
I move approval of the matter as presented in the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Sorensen, second by Commissioner Burney. Discussion, Commissioner Farr.
Just clarity that this does appoint the MPC as a whole and not the Cable Commission as a representative. So thank you.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. We are down to 7D, County Administration announcement.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple items I wanted to talk to the board about. First, we have the board who requested the staff return to the board to discuss winter strategies. The first meeting after the budget is approved in 2020. That was a request made a year ago. You may recall last year it was requested because there was a discussion about use of parks. The request had been that the Public Works Department and park staff come and provide that update. We feel like a lot has changed since then, and we now have our housing and shelter strategist with Sarai Johnson and other staff that are really engaged in this robust effort around shelter and housing. So we're asking the board that we amend this item. I'd like to ask Sarai Johnson, in coordination with Human Services and Public Works and any other entities, to take the lead on bringing that discussion on winter strategies forward, and that we look at doing it at the end of August, just given the it was scheduled to come forward in July 7th, and we're looking at August 20th as the date to bring that forward, just to give time given everything that's happening right now. So that was item one. I'll pause there. I have a couple other brief things, but I just want to make sure that was all right with the board, knowing that we will bring back a discussion about winter strategies. You're going to hear from different staff, but it's going to be, I think, better coordinated than it had been in the past, and a request to bring that forward in August.
So I have a concern with that. Personally, I like the fact of bringing the other folks in on it, but the whole point was to talk about winter strategies earlier in the year than we have in the past. And I've actually told people that we had this on the docket for early July. And so if we're changing the expectation by almost 2 months, I think that is a little bit too long. I could see how we could do it a month later. But I have a concern of waiting too long personally. Anybody else have any comments? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. And I understand the reason for delaying the presentation to the board, understanding that work on winter strategies does not revolve around the presentation of the board. It is going on right now. Right. As I mentioned, the Shelter Stakeholder Committee, which is a subset of the Poverty and Homelessness Board, which ultimately does report to the Board of County Commissioners, is working on it in a multi-jurisdictional fashion.
Any other comments? Commissioner Burney and then Commissioner Sorensen.
I agree with the chair. And for me, at least, one of the fascinating insights we got when we did have a few people, I think it was Mr. McDonald, that talked about food insecurity and needing to begin planning right now. I agree and learn from Commissioner Farr about how other efforts feed into this, and they're going to happen regardless. I just feel like we should not defer this because we were already in the middle of June.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. We're not deferring the work. What we're asking is for a little bit more time to get back and report to the board. We have all hands on deck. We have new staff. We've allocated additional resources to this effort. So I think we're going to be in a pretty good position as it relates to what Lane County is able to put forward for winter strategies for next year. Happy to try to move that up if the board would like that sooner. That just, I know the board appreciates the amount of work that's happening in the organization and the community, particularly around these issues and the number of folks we have doing that. So we'll do our best to bring you that presentation as soon as we can.
Commissioner Sorensen?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I do support the chair's comments on this. And second, I would like to maybe respectfully request this be broken into two parts, and that is that we get the update from Mr. Mcalister, and then like in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then get the work session. So I just, my summary of this is I do support the chair. Thanks.
Any other announcements?
Well, just, I guess I just want to be clear on what I just heard now a request for 2 work session or an update July 7th, and then bringing forward this item before. So I just want to be clear on what you would like us to do.
My preference is that we do just the one meeting, but if we can, to move it up maybe early August instead of late August. I don't know how everybody feels.
Okay.
Commissioner Farr.
Chair Buck, yeah, I certainly support your sentiment on that. And I think that if that's supplemented with a continual update, Mr. Mcalister, you do send out messages every single day. If you could just keep us in the loop, sometimes through that informal method as we wait for the early August work session that you're proposing.
Happy to do that. And again, we're doing weekly updates on the recovery and board meetings. So there's a lot going into not only our work, but our reporting to the board. So we'll do that. We'll move it up and push people to get that information to the board.
And Mr. Mcalister, before you came here, sorry, I'll just point out historically, when I first got to the county commission, we had a meeting on winter strategies. It was the first meeting we really had to talk about winter strategies. It took place the first week of November. So that was pretty horrific because clearly we were a month away from the actual beginning of winter season. So the work that your staff is doing is ongoing, and it is in coordination with multi-jurisdictions through the Human Services Commission and also through the Poverty and Homelessness Board.
Yeah. The other, I just wanted to get direction from the board on as the board knows, we have a hiring chill in place. And so we are holding on hiring positions, and given the decline in resources that we have experienced and continue to experience. One of the positions that is vacant is the performance auditor position. And the board had previously acknowledged the need to hold on the recruitment for that position. And I just wanted to circle back and verify that is the direction that you'd like to go with for the time being, or if you want us to begin recruitment for that position.
Any comments from anybody? Preferences? My personal preference is I think we need a performance auditor sooner than later. We've been without one for a really long time. I'd prefer us proceeding with recruitment personally, but interested in what everybody else has to say. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. Well, I've been a proponent of having Lane County auditor since I ran for commissioner in 1996, and I have succeeded at times in having the county have a performance auditor and other times not. I see the need as being very strong in light of all of the federal and state funds we're going to be processing over the next few years, and that the performance auditor is a necessary function of a modern, large government such as Lane County government. So I favor moving ahead with the recruitment. We do have it in the budget. It is funded, and I think we should move ahead with it. Thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. You know, we have had a performance audit. The most Shanda Miller is currently on the performance audit committee, and Shanda was our very successful performance auditor for her term here, and she is in favor of moving forward with the recruitment. Now, Ms. Mcalister, I'm certain that you see the regular emails that Ms. Miller provides to us, and you know where her heart is regarding performance audit. So I trust your time frame, Ms. Mcalister, but I do agree with Commissioner Buck that the sooner we do engage in the recruitment, the more chance we have of recruiting and hiring the correct fit for the position. Thank you.
Commissioner Burney.
I'm in the minority on this one. I would like to ask Steve, does this create more burden for you? Less? Do you have any input? I would be very curious because we're really talking about boots on the ground operating this thing. I'd like your input.
I mean, in terms of recruitment, that's really a process that our human resources staff would need to focus on doing. In terms of I mean, I think the issue for us organizationally and for the board to consider is that we've asked all of our departments to hold on filling positions unless the position has a direct tie to revenue, a new revenue source, or a revenue source, like a healthcare provider, where if we don't fill it, then we're not receiving resources, or if it's a critical public safety function. But any of these administrative type roles, we've asked our departments to not fill those because we don't want to be in a position. We want to limit the financial impact on the current positions and employees that we have within our organization. So that's generally what. So I think, you know, my concern is more so determining whether or not this is and this is for the board to answer, whether or not this is a critical position for the organization. I will just make a comment about Commissioner Sorensen mentioned grant funding and financial aspects. Performance auditor deals with reviewing performance of different areas, services provided, and performance in areas of the organization. Does not do financial reviews and audits. We continue to conduct annual financial audits with our third-party financial auditor, Moss Adams, on an annual basis, and those will continue, and they will look at grants and money that flows and how it is spent. Performance auditor would function more so to look at where there are areas of services and programs that require improvement. So there you go.
Thank you. So for what it's worth, my opinion is that in this COVID-19 environment, I would rather be consistent with the directive we've given all county departments. And that's the reason why apparently I'm in the minority on this one.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. And Commissioner Burney, you're not in the minority. Actually, you know, the the performance order is not like other departments. This is a position that reports directly to the Board of County Commissioners. Only Steve Mokrahysky and Steve Dingle and the performance auditor to do that. So it's not like other departments. That being said, our experience has been that the performance auditor can place a great burden on other departments in terms of work plan and workload. And for that reason, I do support and I'll deal with Ms. Miller personally regarding the timing on this, but I would support a delay at your discretion, Mr. Mokrahysky, based upon the impact on other departments in particular.
Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. And I will defer to the administrator's judgment on how this impacts workload and budget. I kind of am right there with Commissioner Farr and Commissioner Burney in supporting a possible delay in the hiring process. I do understand that it's probably frustrating to our audit committee. Dennis, who also Dennis Hidgmans is a proponent of us getting somebody back in place and giving them another chance to get a individual performance auditor rather than contracting audits out. So I know they really want to get somebody in place and demonstrate the model works after some not so good experience recently. But I do appreciate that we are in unusual times at best with COVID-19, and it's really changed the playing field in many ways financially for the county and in many ways operationally, manpower-wise. So I'll defer to Steve's judgment in that, and hope that Commissioner Farr can placate the audit committee and keep them happy, understanding the situation, and that, COVID-19, there was the world of December of 2019, and there's the world today with COVID-19, and it's two different worlds.
Okay, see enough folks that support a delay. So it looks like that will be the way we go on this one. Any other announcements?
I think that's it. I had some updates on grants, but I think I'll hold for now. And we are still trying to schedule if it's July 7th or 8th or right around there to do an update on grants and have a discussion with the board about areas to focus on and prioritize. So that's it, unless you have other questions for me. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and I have heard from our coordinator that it is very possible that we'll have, when we come back in a couple of weeks, we'll have a meeting both on the 7th, Tuesday, and possibly also Wednesday, the 8th, because we'll have a lot of items to take care of after the 2-week break. So we'll move on to item 8, our last item for the morning. Order 20-06-16-11 in the matter of approving bylaws and application form for establishing the Lane County Climate Advisory Committee. And with us is Dan Hurley.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Good morning, Commissioners. So yes, I'm pleased to be back with you with Mark Nystrom, our climate strategist. You've had the opportunity to hear a couple of presentations from him. And he's going to present to you today our proposal for a climate advisory committee. This was work that came out of the resolution that the board passed, our climate resolution, back in February. And so now we have a proposal for the makeup of the board, proposed bylaws, and a proposed board order for you to establish the committee. As you're aware, advisory committees steer our important work here at Lane County in lots of different areas, from parks to planning to public health. And it's important for our culture at Lane County that we have public input to guide our important policy work, both for advising the board and guiding staff along the way. So with that, I'll pass to Mark, and he will talk with you about the proposal for the advisory committee.
Good morning, everyone. That was me earlier who screwed up and wasn't muted when I was trying to see if my microphone was actually working. So I apologize for that.
I never would have admitted it.
I know. I was wondering if I should do that or not, but it's one of those tech challenges. what I want to do is walk through some of the highlights of the bylaws. Much of the language in the bylaws or much of the articles are just boilerplate language provided to us by our legal counsel, but there's other parts that are really important. So if you'll indulge me, I'll walk through some of the important parts that make this committee unique, and it should take me about 5-10 minutes to do that, and then I'll be there to answer questions and make any revisions that you feel are necessary. So if we can start with Article 2, that's the purpose of the Climate Advisory Committee, and it's meant to advise the board on all matters relating to the Climate Action Plan development and implementation, to coordinate with other community groups throughout Lane County, to proactively communicate to initiative sponsors to improve the coordination of work efforts, align resources, and connect with interested parties and technical advisors. They'll also provide community outreach and marketing of Climate Action Plan, community mitigation and adaptation actions to community members and neighborhood associations, other organizations like that, and to encourage to complete additional actions. They'll provide an annual report to the Board of Commissioners that includes all Climate Action Plan initiatives that were submitted and completed, as well as progress made on community actions outlined in the Climate Action Plan. And they'll proactively research on funding opportunities for climate-related activities. There's lots of grants out there, and having them do that research would be great. I'm going to jump ahead to Section 3.2, so Article 3, Section 2. The Lane County Climate Action Team, that's our internal group of staff that we've been meeting for the last, well, I haven't been there the whole time, but they've been meeting for the last 6 months or so. They'll identify 3 to 5 priority actions for the Climate Action Committee to work on in their first year, giving them some direction initially. And then subsequent work plans will be developed by the CAC, and that work plan will be approved by the board. I'm going to jump ahead to Article 4, Section 1, membership. So I think this is an important thing that we should probably discuss. There'll be 5 members, 1 member each, are appointed by each of you, each of the commissioners. And the idea is that if there's a commissioner that ceases to be in office, that commissioner's successor may appoint a new member or remain with the other member. We'll have additional 5 at-large members that will be appointed following recommendations made by the staff. So staff, that climate action team that I mentioned before, will get together and look at all the applications and forward the appropriate, or a group of applications to the board. And then 1 county commissioner will be on the board, and that will be nominated and approved by the board, and each appointed member will have a vote. So there'll be 11 members total. There'll be 2-year terms, except the initial 5 members appointed by the commissioners. This is in order to stagger them. So we'll start with 5 members that will have 1-year terms, and then 5 members will have 2-year terms. After that 1 year, those initial 5 can apply to continue on the CAC, and we'll make an exception for them and have eligible for 3 terms. So they'll be able to serve for 5 years, whereas everyone else will be serving for 4 years. And again, that's just to get staggered, so we're not losing 10 members at once. Jumping ahead to section or Article 4, Section 4. This is pretty standard. Chair and vice chair elected by majority, 1-year terms, then they may be reelected. They'll begin the first meeting of the year, so that would typically be calendar year, or sorry, it is calendar year, typically in January. chair is responsible for setting dates and times for the meetings. Hopefully we'll just have a regular third Wednesday of the month kind of thing. Prepare materials for the meetings, preside over meetings. It'll be their official spokesperson, and vice chair will take over when the chair is not available. Pretty standard stuff. In section or Article 4, sections 5 through 7, it just spells out some attendance rules, how a member might be removed, how to file vacancies, and just notes that a sitting committee member must reapply for a second term if that's what they're interested. Section 4.8, so Article 4, Section 8. This is where it really spells out the idea that national research and local experience have shown that the impacts of climate change tend to disproportionately impact marginalized communities, such as communities of color, the elderly, low-income communities, and people experiencing disabilities. So committee membership should reflect this diverse representation that include people of different racial and or ethnic backgrounds, identities, abilities, and perspectives who bring a connection to and a relationship with advocating for specific communities, have a professional background, have show community leadership or other relevant experiences in equity issues, know how to impact institutional change in the areas of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and have experience across multiple dimensions of diversity. But that's not all we're looking for. We're looking for a group that often gets overlooked is rural Lane County residents. It would be fantastic if we could get some people that have the lived experience of being in rural Lane County, which is a very different experience than the next category, which would be a Eugene Springfield metro area. Again, we want representation that reflects both of these, both rural folks and metro type folks. Looking for members from tribal governments. Really like to have someone who's a youth member, someone under 25. That's how I define youth now, I guess. And need to have people from major employers and industries, small businesses, people who are physical or climate scientists. And we really want to make sure that we get representation from across the county. So we want to make sure that no fewer than 3 of the 11 are from outside of the Eugene Springfield area. Now moving down to Article 5, sections 1 through 5, just discusses quorum, how to get that, how to, that decisions are made on a majority vote, that they have to hold at least 9 meetings a year, that preferably, when possible, 2 of those meetings will be outside the Eugene Springfield area. Clearly, right now, we're going to be doing everything online, but once in-person meetings are possible, again, I'd like to see the committee to get outside of the metro area. They can hold special meetings. They can participate via phone or video conferencing. Obviously now we're much better set up for that. And there needs to be public comment at each meeting. Moving ahead to Article 6, they can create committees or ad hoc committees, excuse me, or task force. But those, so if there's a specific issue that they want to dig into really deeply, they can create a subcommittee or a task force, dig into that issue, and then that task force would be dissolved after the work is done, unless the committee wants to keep it going. Article 7 explains how it'll be staffed. I plan on helping staff that committee. We want them to have the opportunity to review department reports on their climate actions. They can make recommendations. It's just a recommendation at that point. They can hold public meetings are when they're holding these things, they are public meetings, and that they can conduct research if they want to, and that could be shared with stakeholders and county officials. Article 8 and 9 just talk about how the Climate Advisory Committee can informally affiliate with similar organizations. So if someone from the CAC wants to go to a different similar group, they can attend it, but and the CAC can authorize that member to do that, but they have to explain that they're representing themselves in an individual capacity and make clear that they're not speaking on behalf of the CAC unless it's been approved by the CAC. And then the last section is that bylaws are amendable by a majority vote. So those are the bylaws, and I'm going to pause there and ask if there's any questions about that. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the application, but let's take a break there and see if there's any questions about the bylaws.
Any questions? Comments? Suggestions? Commissioner Burney.
So this is what you've been up to? So, this seems, it seems really rigid and lots of rules and lots of things. I guess that's necessary. So I'm just going to make two comments. Mark, I thought you were hired so you would be the staff to this committee.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I'm planning on staffing these meetings.
Okay, I'm just asking. It
Sure.
Seems like in the way you've identified representation, we ought to have about 40 people. How do you check all those boxes?
Yeah.
And how do you make it so it's not too political? That we're not really getting into politics, we're getting into substantive, science-based recommendations.
Well, Commissioner Burney, I'm counting on the commissioners to appoint the most excellent candidates that we have in this county, and providing them good guidance. It is a challenge. Before working for the county, I worked for the city, and I helped staff their sustainability commission, and it's a challenge to stay in the lane of working on issues that, in this example, the county would have some sort of authority on and have some sort of regulatory ability, and prevent it from becoming political or too activist-ish. So yeah, it's a challenge.
So last comment, and good luck with that. I think that this is important. So I mean,
yep.
that your advisory, that the advisory board and task force structure is good. I've used that before. It enables, with task forces, you to really dig into the bowels of expertise and operations. I don't know, but I think that this is a group that will be external facing as well. So it's not just advising the county on our operations, but it's making recommendations for all of the communities of Lane County where we will not have direct authority, but nonetheless, there will be some education going on. I have no criticism. I just want to share those comments. I would hate this to be another process, rules, politics focused thing, as opposed to just action and job creation, honestly.
Any other questions or comments on the bylaws? Okay, why don't you move on to the application?
Okay, and thank you. So the second document, Exhibit B, that you have with you has the Climate Advisory Committee background and application. So the background just contains the background, and it explains the purpose of. So what I'm picturing is a web page where this is going to be posted, and it'll give the opportunity for community members to see why this is happening and what the purpose of the CAC is going to be. It explains the expectations for advisory board members. So if they decide they're going to apply, they know that this is a time commitment and that they're going to be meeting on a regular basis. And then it has an interest form that they need to fill out. It just provides us some basic information. It contains two or the next part is asking for 2 references that can explain or that we can call and talk to them about their ability to perform on a committee like this. There's 5 application questions that will be used to look at the applicants. Staff will read those and make choices based on those. And then there's some optional demographic questions that again are optional, but would help us in seeing you know, who's interested in this and who's applying, and perhaps there might be areas where we're missing and we'll need to do more outreach. So if for example, we don't get anyone from a large industry applying, maybe doing a better job of coordinating with the chambers of commerce from the communities to try to find business folks. So so that's it. That's all there is to the application. We were really tried to make it not too onerous for people, but ask enough questions to get a little depth into what their understanding of the topic is.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Hey, Mark, you did an admirable job with this presentation and also the documentation. I understand Commissioner Bernie's concern, I guess would call it, regarding it not be a political issue. It's not. It's something that we need to move forward with wholeheartedly. But I really believe that the way you presented the makeup of the committee, and I'm talking about this during the application discussion, the makeup of the committee presents a nice matrix which really gets good representation. 11-member committee is big, but when you think about the fact that we're trying to get as many people from as many different parts of the county as possible, or as many different interest groups, I guess, as possible, while at the same time still having a good selection of people who have a distinct background, information, and expertise in the area. I think you've done a good job of making that happen with this matrix. It brings to mind when I became executive director of Food for Lane County, the board was haphazardly appointed. We came up with a matrix that gave a broader representation that really presented a much more even approach to providing food in Lane County. I believe you've come close to that with this right here, that we stand a good chance of success with this committee based upon the way you've outlined it, Mark. So good job. I guess there's only one caveat, and that is that each commissioner appoints a member, and that's where it might become political. And so I would hope that commissioners would stand behind the responsibility of making certain that we get somebody who's going to be a good, active member of the committee to move it forward in ways that we all hope and expect. So Mark, just bottom line, good job. I really appreciate the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Farr.
Any other comments? Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the work that went into this. And I guess when we get reports back, we should consider monitoring the effectiveness of such a, say, rigid structure. Might work, might not. And I would say let's go into it hoping it will, and that that if there are problems, that it should be brought to our attention so we can modify this. Thank you so much.
Any other comments? All right, I don't see any. And so we do have an order in front of us. I would entertain a motion to approve order 20-06-16-11 as presented.
So I'm sorry, jumped the gun. So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Bernie, second by Commissioner Farr. Discussion, Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. I'm going to be voting against this motion because our entire climate action effort is political and is basically a waste of county resources. I actually made a motion during the budget committee process to eliminate this effort and transfer that money into the sheriff's office to actually do some environmental good. Our per capita carbon footprint of our county operations is less than Multnomah, Clackamas, Washington County, and King County. Our per capita climate carbon footprint in Oregon is below the national average, and we're one of the lowest in the U.S. by state. And the U.S., in fact, has had a 20% decrease in their per capita carbon footprint since 1980. Yet at the same time, China's carbon footprint has quadrupled per capita. And China's carbon footprint continues to grow per capita with 3 times the population of the United States. Everybody's concerned about the impacts of climate change on the poor, minorities, and underrepresented communities, yet no one's ever concerned about the impact of the cost of some of the actions being taken to combat climate change, how it increases fuel and energy costs for those same people. You know, this whole effort is a wasted effort and a waste of county resources, and the effort is political. So the Climate Action Committee is political, and I will be voting no on this motion.
Commissioner Burney.
Mark, I just wanted to let you know that my comments were sort of warning signs out there, but really I agree with everything that Commissioner Farr stated, and I will vote to support this.
Any other comments? I don't see any, so we'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Motion passes 4-1 with Commissioner Bozovich in the nay. Are there any county council announcements under item number 9?
Chair Buck, this is
oh yes, okay.
Chair Buck, this is Steve Dingle. Yes, I have a couple. The first would be that I need at the end of the day a commissioner to participate in a hearing in the Lynn County timber case. So I think that has to do with attorney fees and potential settlements. So that's been the direction from the court. So I'll need the person, a commissioner identified, and then I'll work with them to respond to a doodle poll for the day that that'll occur. And then the second thing I wanted to mention is that we did get word that we were going to get some money from the state as part of the pass-through funding from CARES. There are some concerns I have with the agreement and the potential liability for the county. We just got this information yesterday in their 21-page agreement, but I wanted to make the board aware that we'll be making a presentation to you on your next board meeting, which is in July. And that's all I have unless you have a specific question.
Any questions? I don't see any. All right. No executive session, right, Mr. Dingle?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll keep other business for the afternoon. We are in recess.